Hello friends, myself Shirish Johari, Assistant Professor in the Department of Data Science at ABES Engineering College, Ghaziabad. Today, I would be discussing aspects of function calling in C programming. But before getting to the topic, let me have a brief about functions in C. In C, we can divide a large program into the basic building blocks known as functions. The function contains the set of programming statements enclosed by its body. A function can called multiple times to provide reusability, modularity, and C programming. Or in other words, we can say that the collection of functions creates a program. With the same formation, if a function can be used, it may or may not accept any argument, or it may or may not return any value. And based on these facts, there are four different aspects of function call that we are going to discuss today. These are the four types of function calling in C language. Number one, function without arguments and without return value. A function who's not going to use any argument and will not return any value for itself. Number two, function without arguments and with return value. Again, the function will not use any argument and will definitely return a value for itself. Third one, function with arguments and without return value. A function will use arguments for itself, but will not return any value for itself. And fourth one, function with arguments and with return value. A function will use arguments for itself and will always return a value for itself. Now, we will dive into the implementation about these four calling formats of function. Number one, function without arguments and without return value. Now we have used a function here, xyz, who is not using any argument and will not return any value for itself. So we will not be using any type of prototype here as the function didn't use any return value. Now this function has been called inside main. When it is called inside main, it lands here into its definition. And it only has a executing string statement that prints boy. So how the execution of the program goes? Main has been executed first, and into main, this printable statement will execute as hello, and after that this function call will generate that prints boy. So we'll have an output hello boy. So here function xyz is not using any type of arguments here and will not return any value for itself. Let us consider another example. Same function we are using here, but with some data values. So we have called this function here inside main, and when the call has been generated, it takes it into its definition here. Here, in its definition, we have used three local variables, A, B, and C, that has been locally defined of integer nature here. A and B will be taking the values from the user as 2 and 3 successively. A will be using 2 and B will be using 3 here. Now these two values will be added up and will get assigned to a third variable, that is C. And now this particular value will be printed here in the definition of xyz itself. So we are having addition of these two numbers without returning any value and without having any arguments for x, y, and z. Second type, function without arguments and with return value. Here the same function xyz I have used without arguments, but it is returning some value for itself, as the value is to be an integer number. So I have defined a prototype here, integer. Now this function has been called inside main. So it will return a value that will have to be assigned to a variable that has been defined inside the function as sum. Now the call has been generated to this xyz, will lands here into its definition. Here two local variables have been used, A and B, that will take user input like 2 for A and 3 for B. And these two numbers will be added and return back to this function x, y, z, so that it has been collected by sum and printed here. So 2 and 3 will have addition as 5 that will get printed here. So the value of this addition will be returned back here to XYZ collected in sum inside function main. Let us take another example. Here, the same function XYZ have been used and we need to calculate the area of square. So this function will have sides for a square. Now, after generating the call, we have landed here for the function XYZ and taken input in a variable that is side from user, side for a square. So here I have taken 2.3 as side measure for a square that has been stored inside this variable side, and this format will get calculated as length into breadth or side into side, and this answer will be returned back to this function XYZ and will be stored in this variable area, and again it will get printed here. So if I'll be taking a side 2.3, the area for the square will be 5.294 times 0. Third type, function with arguments and without return time. Here the function will take arguments for its working, but will not return any value here. Again, I'm quoting the same example as addition of two numbers here. I have defined two arguments for this function XYZ by declaring these two parameters. Now these two parameters will get passed inside the function through main. So I have to use two variables inside main, that is A and B, and we'll be taking input of A and B through user. 2 for A and 3 for B. Now these two values have been passed, called inside this function, and will get onto the definition of this function, and the value of A and B has been copied here in these two arguments. Now these two arguments have again been added and will be assigned to a third variable C that will get printed over here itself. So no value have been returned back to function XYZ, but the parameters have been called up from main here. Let us take another example for the same. Here we have to calculate average of 5 numbers. So now function XYZ will take 5 numbers as of floating nature. So no value has been returned back. So the prototype will be void here. Now these 5 numbers have to be assigned through function main. So I have defined A, B, C, D, and E of floating nature itself. And these 5 numbers will be taken up by the user. So I have taken here 5 different numbers by the user in accordance to A, B, C, D, and E. These 5 variables will now be passed as arguments to the function XYZ. And when the call generates for this XYZ, we lands over here. And these 5 numbers will be supplied to these 5 variables. Now these 5 variables need to be added up to calculate the average. So these 5 numbers have been added up and divided by this floating number. And these formations will give a substituent answer to get stored to this variable average, and this average variable will print the answer here itself. So we'll be getting answer as 2.45 times 0. No value will be returned back to this function, but arguments will be passed on through main to the definition here. Type 4, function with arguments and with return value. Here, the function is using argument as well as it will return the value to itself. So we are using 2 numbers here, again addition of 2 numbers. So we have defined 2 arguments here and it will be returning a value to itself. So we have defined a prototype integer. So by having these 2 arguments, we need to have 2 numbers from function main. So we have defined 2 variables here. These 2 numbers will be taken by user and passed to these function, and the attribute nomination and result will get settled to a certain variable. So we have C here to take up and print it. Now when the call for this function XYZ generates, will land over to this definition here. The values of A and B, that is 2 and 3 from user, will be copied here, add up here, supplied to C, and again the value for C will be returned back to function XYZ, copied into C, assigned to C, and will get printed here. So we'll be having the answer 5. So in this implementation, we are having attributes for the function as well as we are returning the values to the function itself. Again, considering second example here, again, we have to calculate average of 5 numbers. With the same consent, we have defined 5 nominations here, 5 numbers here of floating nature or integer nature that we are using. And the callback that has been generated is of floating nature. So 5 numbers have been used inside main that will be passed in this function, and the call of returning value will be collected here in K and will get printed here. Now, when the call for XYZ generates, we'll get onto this definition. These numbers will be settled in these 5 variables through the user. Now, the 5 numbers will get added up and divided by 5 to have average and will be settled in this variable. And this answer, this result will be passed back to the function XYZ taken by K and printed here. So in this example, these 5 arguments will be used by the function, and again the call will be generated back to this variable, to this function XYZ. So these are the references that I have used for this lecture. Thank you.